video is all about Knex migrations. So by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to use the Knex command line interface to initialize Knex, as well as creating, writing, and running Knex migration files. So what are Knex migrations? They're files representing changes to the database. So every time there's going to be a change, not to the data itself, but to the actual shape of the database, tables or fields in tables, you want to create a Knex migration to track that change. This helps assure that the schema is consistent for the entire team working on the project. And it also helps prevent bugs when the database changes, or it allows us to easily roll back the database if bugs do occur. You could think of it like git commits for your database. Each of these migrations is a snapshot of some change that has occurred to the shape of the database. I've pulled up the Knex documentation, and I want to show you two different sections of the docs that we haven't really used yet. So at the bottom, we have the command line tool. So if you ever need references for the command line interface of Knex, you can find it right down here. As well, I want to show you the schema builder. So the schema builder is the part of the Knex language we'll be using to actually create tables, make changes to tables, design schemas, and so forth. So now you know where to find those references. Let's go ahead and jump on in an empty directory so we can get started with actually using Knex's migration tools. I have open an empty directory called Knex migration example. If you want to follow along with this video, go ahead and pause and create a directory of your own. The first thing we want to do, as usual, is initialize. And now that we have our package.json, we can add two libraries. We have Knex installed locally now, but in order to use the command line interface, we want it globally as well. You can use npm install-g Knex to globally install it. Once that's done, you'll be able to use the Knex command. So this Knex command allows us to run init, any of the migration commands, and any of the seed commands. We'll be focusing on these first two types in this video. Note that you can also run npx Knex without globally installing it and get the same effect. So go ahead and pause the video, get everything installed and caught up, and then we'll run our first Knex command. To get started with Knex, we want to run Knex init. This creates something called a Knex file. The Knex file automatically includes 3 different configure objects for 3 different environments: a development object, a staging object, and a production object. We're going to delete the production and staging objects because we're only concerned with development right now. Now, if you recall, I showed you a simpler way to get off the ground with Knex, which is that we can just hard code in a config object like this wherever we use the Knex library. And while that works, it's not best practice. So moving forward, use the Knex init command to generate a Knex file and use this as the place that you store your config objects. The default object here is using the SQLite 3 driver. Now that you understand database management systems, we can explain how this works a little more. So depending on what database management system Knex is working with, the driver has to be different. In other words, we need a third-party library to serve as the bridge between Knex and whatever database management system we're using. Since we'll be using SQLite, the SQLite 3 library works as a great tool. So that's why we always install SQLite 3 when we install Knex. Next, we have our connection, which points to our database. I'm going to rename this users. And then finally, we want to add in use null as default, which is a good option to prevent bugs and issues when working with SQLite. So this config object is ready. If we wanted to import Knex and use it to run queries somewhere in our code base, we could just export this object from our Knex file. But we won't actually need to do that. In order to use the command line tools, we just need to make sure this is in place. So we are now ready to create our first migration. The command is knex migrate make, and then followed by the name of the migration. Keep in mind, this file that is about to be generated will represent some change to the shape of our database, to our database schema. And right now, since we don't even have a database, probably the first change we want to make is creating a table. So I'm going to name this migration create users table. By default, migrations will appear in a migration folder in the root. We see that this file has been generated, and it does have this. If I stretch this out, we can see it is called create users table, but there's also a big old timestamp added to the front. This is the way in which Knex keeps track of which migrations occurred when, so you definitely don't want to edit this. If we want our migrations to appear somewhere else, like in a data folder, we can customize that in our Knex file, but this will work just fine for now. So within this file, we have two functions, an up and a down function. Up represents the change we want to make to our schema, and down represents undoing that change. Because migrations are not only designed to move our database forward, but also to potentially roll it back if something goes wrong, we always have to write the logic to undo whatever change we want to make. So let's create that table. All of the schema builder functionality can be found on knex.schema. We're interested in a method called createTable. This takes in two arguments, a table name and a callback. And within this callback, we can actually define what columns will be in our table and any constraints. So we want to start with our primary key. And our schema builder has built in this method called increments, which creates an auto-incrementing primary key. So most of our tables will start with this line of code. Next, we might want to create a text field called name. We can put a character limit. Let's actually call this username. The character limit. And we want this to be unique as well as not nullable. So notice that I'm defining the data type, passing in the name and a character limit, and then putting on two constraints as chainable methods. I'm showing you the basics in this video, but keep in mind that if you want to see other features of the schema builder, it's all available to you in the Knex docs. Finally, let's create another text field called website. And for this one, we won't put any constraints on it. This is an optional field if the user wants to include the URL of their website. So that is all the code necessary to create a table using Knex. Now we also have to undo our changes. So we've defined a change where we created a table, but as well, we have to write the code to uncreate a table. In other words, drop it. We'll use a method called dropTableIfExists. And then we'll pass in the name of the table that we want to drop. So notice at this point that even though we've completely written our migration, we don't yet have a users table. In fact, we don't even have a database. In our Knex file, we've specified where we want our database to appear. And let me just change that file extension. So we're expecting a users.db3 database in the root, but no database exists yet. Fortunately, Knex will take care of that for us. So when I run knex migrate latest, which is the command to run all migration files, we see that one file has been run and that the database has been created. Now, if we want to confirm that this thing is created correctly, we can always use SQLite Studio. We can find the desired database in our file structure, open it up, and confirm that the users table has in fact been generated. So our migration worked. A few other notes about migrations before we finish up this video. The first is that keep in mind that these represent snapshots. So unlike a regular code base file that you might come back months later and edit and change, you wouldn't want to do that with a migration file. If you needed to change the schema later down the road, you would want to generate a brand new file to do that. Another thing to keep in mind is that these files are designed for easy rollback. That's why we write our down function. So if we ever decided that this change to our database was not a good idea, we could run Knex migrate rollback. And this would undo the creation of this table. Once again, we can confirm that in SQLite Studio. If we refresh our database, we see the users table is gone. So there's a little crash course in Knex migrations. You can now begin using this logic to design a schema within your codebase.